Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Aleena, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We tried a little earlier and you got caught in a storm, so here we are again. It'll be nice to...
Time number two.
Time number two. This is great, though. I know you're traveling. You're in Florida, so you've got
Yeah.
some weather. And I've been listening to you for a while. I think a couple months now, just watching your Instagram, a couple podcasts I've heard you on, and I'm really fascinated with what you're doing with postural restoration and just the way you think about the body as this giant interconnected complex system. And I think it's important for people to hear your message, so that's why we're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate, just sharing this to me is important. And it's part of what I do. And that's my whole, motto is I want to share and spread this information everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious you're passionate about it when you're teaching online and when you speak about it. So I think it just comes through you. And you do have the ability to articulate this complex thing, the body, the mind, and how it's all interconnected. And I think that's one of the things I've been noticing about these decentralized thinkers versus, which is what like Dr. Jack would say.
Yeah.
It's helping me to start thinking about things that way as a whole, just as a human being, and really trying to see that nothing is broken down to this little isolated thing itself. Everything is so interconnected. And when people are starting to feel pain in their body, or they want to heal, or they want to feel good, we get stuck in going down these little avenues of specialists and experts, so-called experts. And it's happened to me throughout my life with back injury and different things. And it's taught me to start to unlearn. And we were talking about that earlier, how unlearning is a big part of learning and being open-minded and being able to let go of things. So I just wanted to hear your perspective on learning, because it seems like you love to learn and unlearn.
Yeah, and I think unlearning is much harder to do than learning because you have to put your ego aside from what you originally learned and have kind of put into your head and etched in there. And you have to take a step back and be like, can my perspective shift? Is it okay to shift? And it's very hard to unlearn. I think only critical thinkers can actually unlearn appropriately, properly. I think some people can unlearn a little bit here and there. And then there's really critical thinkers that think completely out of the box. And those are the providers that I think are really beneficial and are going to help you find the root cause to whatever you might be struggling with. So, learning for me was actually a really big struggle. I struggled in school specifically. And so it's actually interesting just doing what I do now, because you have to be quite a critical thinker to get to the place where you can look at society and look at medicine and look at what I do with more orthopedic medicine and be able to decipher it for what it is. And so it's just interesting to me because I think the people that struggle in school that are not the straight A students that don't follow the rules, those are the ones that you should really keep your eyes out for.
Absolutely. And we reward in our school system the memorization and this obedience, this compliance. So it's nice to get out of that. I used to hate that system, and I love learning as well. And I just didn't fit well with it. And I would always get in trouble or be told I was ADD or whatever the label was. So I can see you're very much like that as well. And I think a lot of the really curious people, which is just such a natural thing to be human and be curious, but there's people that just don't fit well in that system, and they end up being the ones on the edge that are always finding the new discoveries. And so I like that about the way you think.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I think curiosity is really important, and I think it's lost on us as we get older because the school system pushes it out of our prime way of thinking. And little kids, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, before school are extremely curious and extremely imaginative. And as they get to like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they really lose that. And I think it's just the school system. And I know with myself, like the rules and the way school was set up, raising your hand to go to the bathroom, just didn't make sense to me why I had to learn math if I knew from a very young age I didn't want to do anything in math. So I've kind of defied the odds. Many people didn't think I would make anything of myself, which is kind of crazy. Now I look at it and I'm like, I always knew that there was a plan for me and that I would do something. But I think those little kids that defy the school system, I think they're the ones to watch out for. I think they're the ones that are really going to make waves in the universe.
Awesome. Yeah. And there's a
Yeah.
lot more people really noticing that too. So I see a lot of really brilliant young kids where their parents are taking them out of that
Mm-hmm.
typical system. And you're like, wow, this kid's going to change the world in their own little way. So it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
What is postural restoration and what is it that you do to help people be pain free and to start thinking about the body and the mind differently? And why did you go down this rabbit hole so deeply?
Yeah, so amazing question. So first off, understanding what I do is important because some people are like, "What do you do?" It's so complicated. I do something called postural restoration. It is a science, a method that was developed by Ron, who is based out of Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's who I study from. And I had some amazing opportunities in my life to really learn it in depth and be able to shadow people and mentor under people. But also, I created a lot of opportunities for myself, understanding how to network properly and make friends and just know how to get in with the world of looking at things differently, I think has helped me. But postural restoration itself. So we are looking at the asymmetries of the body, but we're also really looking at neurological like power. How does what we see outside externally look like internally, and why is it getting there? So the brain controls everything. So when we see pain and injuries and issues that are arising, I know that there's always going to be a culprit, and that's the brain. But people are coming in to see me now, even for like autoimmune issues, dystonia, major issues, and all these chronic pain, these illnesses, all of this stuff. To me, I have to take a step back from all these specialists and look at the person as a whole, because that is one human being, and we cannot neglect that they're that person and they have a life story, and that story is why they might be in pain or why they might be struggling with immune system issues or autoimmune issues. So as a postural restoration provider, I am more trained to look more from an orthopedic level and looking at, or I should say, as an athletic trainer, my actual background, my traditional background, I'm trained to look at orthopedic medicine. We do touch on emergency medicine. We learn a lot as certified athletic trainers working on the sidelines of sports teams. But when I was done with my athletic training, I really felt like I wasn't able to properly help the people that were coming to me. I felt like I was just band-aiding them up and throwing them back on the field, and I wasn't able to help them for long term. I wanted to be able to give people more long-term relief. So if you're seeing like retired athletes, a football player 15 years out of playing football is pretty beat up. And I felt like there was way more that you could do to help these people. So I ended up hearing about postural restoration in graduate school from a classmate. And it was powerful for me because I felt like this was something that sparked my curiosity. And also, I couldn't grasp it. It took me a while to grasp and understand and learn. And that's why I stuck with it, because it was so challenging and so interesting and different. And I never experienced any modality like that. And I had already been studying a couple other modalities. Your audience might know functional range conditioning. I did a couple other things, but I never found something so integrative with the component of dentistry and optometry and podiatry that it really was like I flocked towards PRI because it was so unique. And so what we study is asymmetry paired with how neurology is related. And with neurology, you're looking at how the brain senses different things. So the sensory component, how our feet touch the ground from a physical groundedness perspective, how our brain understands our visual system. So not just how well you see, that's your sight, how well your brain understands your spatial awareness, your proprioception, hand-eye coordination, vision, eye tracking, things like that. And then how your teeth touch. So how your bottom teeth, your mandible, come to touch your top teeth on your maxilla. Those sensory components are going to give a feedback loop to the brain about where your body is positioned in space. And so for me, this was fascinating. And so I've been diving in for almost like 7 years now. And it's been really powerful for the people that have come to see me. And now I'm having people seek me out specifically for this because they want it, they hear about it, and they want more.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's very complex. Whenever I hear you speak about it, you get into things that I never would have thought about having so much impact. And then it starts with, I've heard you say you take someone and you first start with the breath and breathing mechanics. And I
Yeah.
myself have dove a little bit deep into the breath work world. And once you get into it, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I just don't know. And I still feel
Yeah.
like a beginner in it. So I went through like oxygen advantage and all these
Hmm.
different modalities and methodologies of thinking. But then I've heard you talk about a lot of the rhetoric around how we breathe and how it's incorrect. And then people
Yeah.
cling to it, that ideological, oh, this is the way. In yoga, it happens, and
Oh,
people
yeah.
get very dogmatic about it. And so I'd love to hear you talk about when you first start with a client, why is the breath the first thing? And then where do you go from there? It seems like you start then with the feet and you work your way up. But let's hear your approach.
Yeah. So, how you breathe is going to dictate your external posture. So, that's really powerful because how you are breathing 25,000 times a day is going to show up visibly with how you're standing, moving, walking, etc. And I didn't mention this before when I talked about that sensory input, but respiratory input is so important for lymphatic drainage, for being able to flow and move and have flexibility even in your cranial bones. How we breathe is the utmost important thing we do in life. And so if we don't breathe properly, which many people don't, we're going to change almost our life expectancy. So even free divers live longer than most humans. And it's because they can hold their breath for a long period of time. So their oxygen capacity is different, their lung capacity is different. So if we think about that, that's an optimal human because they have this capacity to breathe that most other humans don't. So what you asked about yoga, I think is a really, really important question. A lot of yoga methods teach very expansive belly breathing and no expansion in the chest. And I think it's like a problem with semantics of language too, because when they're saying like limit your chest expansion, I think they're really more talking about lifting the shoulders up towards the ears during that inhalation. So as you're breathing in, you don't want your shoulders to come to your ears. We are in agreement with that. I also don't really want that. But the difference between like how many yoga instructors may teach breathing or just in general how breathing is taught versus how we teach it with postural restoration, we put people in positions that compress them in certain areas and expand them in other areas. So this position is going to help get airflow where they are lacking. Every person is slightly different. There are different patterns we see in the body based off our internal asymmetries. And so we will bias certain positions to allow for airflow to move where we want it to move because it's going to go from a place of low to high, right? So we want, or from high to low. So we want to move airflow where it's compressed naturally. So, and how are we compressed naturally is really the next leading question because we naturally are asymmetrical. We are all born with a liver on one side, on the right side, that's 3 pounds on average. We are all born with 3 lobes of lung on the right and 2 on the left, and a diaphragm that's much bigger and stronger, hemidiaphragm, on the right half of our body compared to the left half. We also have a brain that's neurologically wired differently in the right hemisphere versus the left hemisphere. Most people are righties, and our world is built for righties. So because of this, and I'm brushing over some of the pieces here, but because of this, we have different patterns that torque our body into different positions, which is why we might have compressed areas on one half of our body or one area of our body compared to other regions of our body. So with respiration, we're able to manipulate that and change that pretty quickly in people. So I always start with the breath, and how we learn in PRI, all of my colleagues, we all start with the breath, and all of our techniques have a respiratory component because that respiratory component is a sensory component as well.
Cool. Can you talk about in this conversation, maybe even help people that are listening and not watching? Is there a way to give people an example of how you would want them to start focusing on the breath,
Yeah.
obviously, and shifting to nasal breathing and just
Yeah.
some of the components that matter most?
Yeah. So, of course, nasal breathing 100% all the time, as much as you can. What's interesting is our techniques, we exhale through the mouth. And we do that specifically because it gives you more ability to sense your obliques. So, I want to think about somebody walking in space. If you're walking, essentially, if you watch a baby learn how to walk, they are taking a step, falling forward and catching themselves, and then they're taking another step. They're falling. So walking is mini falling, fall forward all the time. And when you walk, you have to be able to shift your body onto one half of one side, come to kind of center, and then shift to the other side. That is the gait pattern walking. I'm simplifying it a lot, but you kind of get the gist there. So when we walk forward a lot, that's what we do. We're bipedal humans. We, a lot of times, will see people kind of extend up to keep us upright. So that's a lot of what we'll see with people. And because of that extension and always walking forward, we'll see kind of an opening or a very very open area in the front cavity. So our belly will be easily able to expand. So in yoga, they teach a lot of belly breathing, and I'm really not for that because we are already going to have not such a hard time getting air into our belly because of how we walk, because of the human gait cycle, because of what we do. A lot of people lift a lot of weight in an extended position. A lot of people play sports in an extended position. So if you think about extension, think about rib cages flaring up, pelvis is dumping forwards. So now we're open in the front and really compressed in our back space. So what I would do for somebody like that and what I do for people like that, obviously I make it very specific towards them, but we have techniques where we're in like an all four position, rounding our back, tucking our tail under, getting our ribs into what we call internal rotation. So they're coming back and into our body. And then we say, we set them up where one side is actually more elevated compared to the other because some areas of our body are more forward compared to the other. So what we'll see with people is, we'll be in an extended position where our rib cage is lifted up, but a lot of people will have a left rib flare more than a right, or a pelvis on the left that's more forward than the right. And we're more in what we call a stance on the right leg and swing on the left leg. And so these postures we want to mitigate when we do this positional sort of postural restoration breathing. So when we elevate one knee or one hand in an all four position and we have that person breathe there, we're going to get a natural expansion in that upper back on both sides, but then we're going to bias one side when we know about this person's asymmetries. So that's one example. There's 700 plus techniques. Postural restoration is, I attribute a lot of my success to them. I speak about it and I have other things that I use with it. I'm very holistic in my approach, which is different than some of my colleagues. That's just me. But the techniques are pivotal for people who are struggling with chronic pain because you're looking at these asymmetries that they have that maybe got worse over time, maybe got worse with braces or LASIK eye surgery or whatever. And we're looking very in depth and we're hitting it exactly like nail on the head. This is exactly what you need because of these asymmetries.
Yeah, I can see, it's like you're showing me that there's a doorway, the breath. You look in and then you're like, but hold on a minute. Each person, as they look in, they have a different doorway that we have to go and choose and select for because there's so many issues for each person based on their past. And then I've heard you mention how much our eyes and our teeth and all of this stuff is so interconnected to the nervous system and what we're doing. And I didn't used to think of it that way. I thought of it more as like just basic mechanics and make sure that they're walking right and what's your gait like. And now it's like you've sort of thrown a monkey wrench at me, you and many others now, because I'm like, oh, wait a minute, because I've had Invisalign and all these things and teeth pulled where they want to yank out your wisdom teeth. And then I've heard what you talk about. So let's get into the next step. Say you get someone, they come, you start looking at the breath mechanics and we start giving them a protocol for that, each person. Then you go to the feet. Is that correct? Or where do you go next?
It's very person specific. Sometimes I'm going top down. Somebody comes in and it's clear to me that they have stuff going on in their cranium based off their history. I'm gonna start mainly up top. But the techniques I give personally, how I work as a provider, is that I start pretty conservative with techniques I give. And I give basic techniques to a lot of people for a couple sessions. And then I can get a little bit more specific and looking at more cervical or cranial, etc. So I will always tell people when they come to see me, everybody starts with getting a new shoe. I don't care if you're in fashion, I'm still going to educate you on shoes because how your feet hit the ground is going to make a really big difference in how you feel every single day. because we are outside walking on wood floors, concrete surfaces, flat ground, when we're meant to walk on grass, and we're meant to walk on dirt and desert land and marshland, etc., or sand, where the floor, the ground, should actually come up to our foot. But our modern society, we're walking on flat surfaces. So we have to mitigate that and make sure that when people are walking on flat surfaces, that they're in a shoe that's going to give them a heel counter and an arch support. And those two things are crucial with me even getting anybody to feel a little better. So that's a non-negotiable. When people come and see me, they have to get on a good shoe, into a good shoe.
What's
And
a good example of a good shoe for a beginner? Like, are you transitioning to one shoe in the beginning and then easing them into like a different shoe for different activities? Or tell
yeah.
me about shoes.
Usually we use a lot of Brooks running shoes. We have a list of shoes. I'll send you a link. I have a PDF that's free that I wrote up all about different shoes. Every like 6 months, Brooks, Asics, all the running shoes change all their shoes, which is a headache,
Mm-hmm.
headache and a half. And so we have to go along with that. But for the most part, Brooks makes a pretty good shoe. The Brooks Ghost, the Brooks Adrenaline, every shoe, there are different specifics of each shoe that you need to look at. Maybe a low arch foot needs to go to one shoe versus a high arch foot. But it ultimately, if there's a heel counter and an arch support, most people are going to notice a difference. And the institute that I learned from, they review shoes every 6 months, and they come out with a list to give out to people. Obviously, they can't review a ton of shoes, but they look at running shoes because that's what most people should be wearing on a day-to-day basis. In the summer, I get people into like Birkenstocks. I like the brand Echo also. Those are my go-tos, but mainly in the winter and in the fall and spring, most people, I'm recommending them to try Brooks or Asics. There's a couple Hoka, but I'm not a huge fan of that. Um,
Because it's
and
way too much support and too big of a
yeah,
adjustment.
so let me take my shoe off and explain to you so people could see if they're watching. But so this is the Brooks Ghost, and if I squeeze the back here, we
Mm-hmm.
have a heel counter, and so it's not just completely collapsing down. I can't really press this part of the heel down, and it's pretty hard, and it's cupping the back of my heel to help put my talus bone in an optimal position,
Hmm.
really for my neck. It's not. I tell people, I'm like, the shoe is not for your foot. The shoe is for your neck. And people
Mm.
are like, oh, okay. And then when people hear that, they're like, okay, great. Then the problem with, so if I bend here, that bends exactly where the toes should be bending to be able to push off and move forward. And there's a good arch support inside the shoe too. But with Hokas, they are very lifted up at the front. And the problem with that is that kind of really pushes you forward. That's only really good if you're a lot older, if you've had some issues to your great toe or any of your toes really, and it helps to kind of push you forward. So like my 80-year-old clients, I might put them in a Hoka, but I see a lot of 25-year-olds walking around in Hokas, and I'm like, why are you in that?
Mm.
So they kind of turn off your glutes. They don't let your glutes work to capacity when you're in the normal walking pattern. And everything I'm looking at is it helping you breathe? Is it helping you walk? Because that's what we're made to do in life.
What do you think about, like, there's obviously in this one little subject, just like all of them, there's going to be so many people that are in an ideological camp, right? And I try
Oh
not
yeah.
to do that. I'm always like, let's try this, and I'm never set. And I actually like to mix it up with my own personal, like I
Mm-hmm.
have the zero drop wide toe shoe box that I actually will wear when I'm out walking on an inconsistent ground. I've worked my way to that. I didn't just
Yeah.
drop into those and crush my spine and heels and joints. And but I'm curious what you say to like the zero drop people or the low tech shoe people that
Yeah.
would just jump on you right now, of course, because I
Oh,
want you to.
they do jump on me.
You can hear it.
Yeah, I know. I actually wore barefoot shoes myself for 4 years. So I actually still have a pair of barefoot boots. I have inserts in them. I will wear them. I do like them. I really love the idea. I think they have amazing marketing. I do not think it's meant for people in modern society, except for what you just said. You said, I wear them, I've worked up to being able to wear them, but you're wearing them on an uneven surface. I think they're fine if you go hiking in them. I don't have a problem with that. I think they're fine if you're on grass. I have a problem with them when you're walking on a flat surface.
Yeah.
That's when I think it's problematic, because I was wearing them in London and in New York City, and that is cobblestone and concrete. And that's not, you need more cushion for that. we're not meant to be walking like that.
Did you start to get knee and hip and joint pain from that?
Oh man, no, not specifically, but I was like an athlete at the time. I was so extended and I had just a lot of things. And actually, for me, when I transitioned into these shoes, like Brooks, I didn't feel any difference because I had like 4 head injuries at the time. I needed to address my cranium before I felt the shoes. Now, because everything has been addressed and things are so much better for me, my nervous system is in like an incredibly different spot than it was like even 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Now, if I wear heels or if I wear a different shoe, I'll feel it, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But
That seems so typical when you start to really clean up your diet, or
yeah,
you start to get healthier and more aware of your body. You get embodied. You start to feel everything, and it's the same thing
yeah,
with the mind. Like once you start to slow the mind down, and it's not just spinning, you start to pay attention to the subtleties more, and you're more aware of everything, or the sun even. Like I've been obsessed with
hmm,
catching sunrise and sunset, but if I don't now,
so
I'm
good.
more agitated. I'm like, oh no, I'm not stressed about it, but I'm like, fuck, I can't catch the sunrise. That's
Me
really
too.
important to me.
Me too. I really feel a different. You feel it in your body. You know, they say like you don't know how good you could feel until you've felt good, and that's
Hmm.
how I feel when even if I wore those boots with the inserts for one day at work, and I never wear anything but Brooks or Asics to work, and my heels were hurting me. It's like it was an annoying pain,
Hmm.
and it was fine. I'm fine, but I don't feel that on a regular basis. People struggle with these annoying pains all the time, and that's their life.
Yeah.
I don't have that, so I don't want to have that.
Same thing with like the blue light and the EMF exposure and things like that. Once you
Yeah,
start to clear it and get rid of it and wear blue blockers or be outside more, you become far more sensitive to the fact that you even, whereas I see other people or even my past self where I didn't even know it was a thing. And I think you
yeah,
just adapt to that and it becomes your normal baseline and your baseline adjusts to the
yeah.
environment, which is not always a good thing, obviously.
It's the same with gluten. It's the same with anything. Like I didn't. I
Hmm.
ate gluten for 20 years, and I thought I was fine, and then I cut it out, and dairy too, and now it's like, oh, I cannot eat that. I don't feel
Mm,
good. I want to feel
right.
good. So
Yeah.
yeah, not everybody has that mindset though. So me and you are on the same wavelength, and I'm sure your listeners are also, or else they wouldn't be listening. So I hope this resonates because I definitely think not everybody um, feels that way. They're
Right.
okay with feeling okay.
Yeah, well, I've even had people, it happens very common in our culture where people actually will instead make fun of you for it, right? That's the easy
Yes.
way out is be like, oh, what are you going to worry about everything? And it's like, I don't worry about any of it, actually. I just sort of adjust as I go. And I
Right.
have Carrie Bennett, she came on the show and she's really good at helping people to take those little bite size changes. That way it's not overwhelming and she's kind
Mm.
about it. Whereas, like Dr. Jack might be more harsh about it and say, well, F you, I don't care if you do it. I'm talking to the savages type approach. But at the end of the day, I just want to connect with the average person or people that are in society that are not feeling good and that are full of pain and help
Yeah.
them see that it doesn't take an overwhelming amount of adjustment in the beginning. Let's take some practical little things from everybody and start to throw them into your daily habits of
Yeah.
thinking and being. So,
Yeah. Just get like, this is what I think about with the shoes. It's such a simple thing.
hmm,
You're wearing shoes anyway. Just choose a pair that's going to make you feel good. It's the
that's
first
right.
thing that touches the ground in the morning.
Yep.
Even if you are in fashion, I've had, patients that are in fashion, they can't, or they're models, they have to wear certain things. I make them wear their shoes at home. It's not hard. Get a pair for the inside of the house. You'll feel better.
Mm.
And usually people come to me and they're like, oh my God, that's so much better. Even people that don't do techniques, that don't do anything else, like that can it can make a 20-30% difference in your life. That's
I
awesome.
know. Especially the light thing. It's so simple to just
Oh
get
man.
outside more, or and if you are inside, get on Scott's website and buy a Neura light for $30 that lasts, I think, 45 years if it's on three
Oh
hours a
my
day or
God.
something. It's insane. And all of a sudden, you got your light thing solved. Like if I'm inside like this, I have those on. What a simple adjustment that I don't
It's
now have to wonder about.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, that's why I
So
wanted to do this outside because it was raining all morning. I was like, oh, I went on a walk this morning, but I just want to be outside. I can, right? Like, so
it's awesome.
yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit. There's so many things. I want to do the teeth, of course, and the
Yeah, yeah.
idea of that with the eyes. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff with CPAP. And I'd like to hear about that because a lot of guys at work are getting on CPAP because they go do some sleep study. And I don't want to be the one that's like, you shouldn't do that. What's the best way to approach
Yeah.
somebody when they're doing something? And what have you found to be the best approach with someone like, say, with CPAP?
CPAP is an interesting one, right? Because people are going to dentists usually, or they can't breathe at night. They're snoring, and they're getting this one device to make them breathe better or sleep better. But if you think about it, if you can't breathe during the day walking around and laying on your back at night, then why would it be a good idea to do high flow airflow down your throat if you can't even breathe laying down? So I think we're suffocating people in a way, because now we're forcing somebody to become ultra hyperinflated, a person that's already hyperinflated, not even talking about the CO2, carbon dioxide oxygen ratio, because that messes with it. But also, your brain cannot learn how to breathe when you are stuffing air down your throat.
Yeah.
And there are ones for nasal to make it go down your nose, but most of them are not. Most of them go down your mouth. So now we're encouraging mouth breathing. So I am not a fan of the CPAP at all. Also, most people's bodies are very forward in space. So if we just move their body back in space and gave them some grounding and awareness of their heels and change their cervical position ever so slightly, they might stop snoring. So it's also a very nuanced topic, because obviously it's specific to the person, and somebody with really poor sleep apnea might, need a device. But I feel as though the appliances we make in the clinic with my dentist that are very simple, flat, plain mandibular splints. So what that means is that it clips into your bottom jaw, and it's just a flat guard. So Invisalign will kind of be molded to your teeth. It doesn't look like that. It's completely flat. So when your top teeth and bottom teeth hit, they're getting almost like an eraser to their bite. They're getting a repatterning to their system. And it allows for the jaw to shift in all different directions, which will open up your airway when you're sleeping at night. So I have actually had patients that I had a patient with significant sleep apnea, significant. And we got her an appliance first, and that helped her. It lowered the events she was having, about 50 events per hour. So anything above 5 events per hour is not normal. She was having 50. So she wasn't sleeping. She was like probably in her 40s or 50s. I can't remember. And ended up, we did the appliance, and it got down to maybe 20 events or 30 events. And then we started mouth taping once she had the appliance, and she went down to below 5, and she completely got off her sleep apnea. That's possible. I've had multiple patients. I just remember her specifically because I have her chart in my phone.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very hard topic because people get very attached to their sleep apnea device.
Yeah.
But if you are educated on the topic, then you can take a step back and look at it from a different angle. Then you maybe
and then there's so many other variables too, like the idea that you're over breathing, like you said, all night long. And you just talked about the longevity and the length of life for people that are doing breath holds, free divers and things like that. So that obviously is an unintended consequence where you're over breathing. I'm sure it has an effect on your heart. I'm sure it has an effect on, there's so many things that the collateral effects that no one looks at when we're specialists and experts, and everyone's picking the body apart like this and giving you a solution to a symptom, when you're like, hold on a minute, let's get to the root of this. And maybe I need a little tool, like you said, to clip in the beginning, but maybe your circadian health is so fucked that you haven't even thought of that as the first principle, and just getting up earlier and catching the sun and going to bed at the right time and not having blue light in your face, and diet. And there's so many variables you could clean up first before you just jam this breathing device on your face.
And most people don't know. That's the worst part. That's why I love doing podcasts like this, because most people literally don't know. I have patients come in and they're like, oh, there's other things I could do. I'm like, of course. You weren't born with a sleep apnea device attached to you. You weren't born with sleep apnea. Mm-hmm. So of course you can reverse things like that.
And you don't want to carry that thing around with you on travel.
Traveling? No, thanks. Also, yeah, like you just said before about all these other issues. So when, in my perspective, if you are a hyperinflated, so your rib cage is lifted upwards and your lungs are never getting fully expelled, like your diaphragm's never going into the full range of motion contraction that it should, your lymph system is going to be off because you're not properly breathing. Breath and movement is the two main things to help control, get your lymph moving, your lymph drainage. And then you're going to have stagnant lymph. Now we're talking about autoimmune issues and major other issues. So this is why in the clinic, when people come into me and that's like their main complaint is, let's say, sleep apnea, I know it's more than that, because it can't just be one thing.
Sure.
And this is why this siloed society of medicine is really problematic, because now this person just went to, they went to a dentist, an airway specialist. They're only looking here. But maybe this person has a major dairy allergy and they've been congested their entire life and they've never tried to cut out dairy. And this sleep specialist doesn't look at that. So it's really the siloed society we have is very problematic. That's why I'm not a specialist. I've never been. I've always been more of a generalist. I take a step back and I look at everything with that person. And I am the first one to say, I'm not an orthodontist. I'm not an optometrist. I'm not a podiatrist. But I play with different components of their world.
Hmm. Yeah, and even the idea, I'm sure you've gotten into this. I think I've heard you mention mouth taping and how you don't want to just shove someone into a full-blown mouth tape
No.
overnight. That can be just detrimental and it'll cause panic and all the other
Yeah.
elements. But you could work your way up to learning how to breathe through your nose for a month or two while exercising or while walking, and start really cultivating that bigger airway through nose breathing throughout their life, and then start doing a little tiny piece of tape or something to assist them, but they can still take it off or breathe through their mouth if they do gas. But what do you think about mouth tape, or at least
Yeah.
describe that?
I'm a very big fan. I really like mouth tape. I hate all the ones on the market. I think they're horrible, to be honest. I have not found one I like. I make my own. I'm not going to give away my secret sauce of that, because I really want to actually make it and sell it for people one day, because I think I have a great idea with it and my patients love it. But I do think that almost all the designs are problematic. I am very, very against the full coverage mouth tapes, especially for children. You don't want to put a full coverage piece on a child, and an adult too. It's going to create anxiety, panic, etc. Also, you do need to be able to have use of your secondary breathing mechanism just in case anything happens. I'm a very big fan of, if somebody is really struggling to breathe through their nose, we need to clean the nose. We need to use things like Beekeeper's Naturals, X Clear, to open up neti pots, to open up the sinus cavity and open up the nose. The way we brush our teeth, we should clean our nose every day too. And the other component is myofunctional therapy. So I don't know if you know about myo. I don't know if your audience knows, but they are people, they're usually speech and language pathologists, sometimes dental hygienists, who work with tongue posture, tongue position. And I work with a few of them very closely. And it's powerful because, especially with children, but also with adults, it can make such a significant change in cranial structure, as well as how you're breathing. Because that tongue should be on the roof of your mouth. If it's not glued up there, then there's a problem. So, yeah, I work with myofunctional therapists, especially for people that might have a hard time breathing through their nose. I also have people start throughout the day. Just tape your mouth a little bit, one small piece, one strip, during the day. Do it when you're on the computer doing nothing. I don't have people start immediately at night. I did for myself when I first learned about it, because I just wanted to try and I didn't have a problem breathing through my nose. So I was fine. It's actually pretty funny because both my parents are really, really bad mouth breathers, and it kills me. But
Yeah.
you can only change the people that want to be
Yeah.
helped.
It always feels like the people you want to help the most are the ones that are not going to do it, but it's the way it is. And
That's
maybe
how
that
it.
would.
That's life.
Absolutely. So maybe you can talk a little bit about eyesight and just the vision component to this,
Yeah.
and then a little bit more about the teeth and the mouth and
Yeah.
how that affects everything.
And this is the stuff this is a juicy stuff. Everybody loves this stuff. It's funny because I don't really even get up to this stuff until like session 5 with somebody. But I do have, because everybody has wanted all this information, I did make like a platform. It's called Rooted Well Advanced, that talks all about this. And I have videos talking about progressive lenses and all these other, LASIK eye surgery. And,
Mm.
but we'll get into it here. So your eyes are, of course, they help you see, but They are really linked to your brain. They are literally squished out brain matter. And so when we think of it as a piece of your brain, we shouldn't just be sitting you in I don't know if you or your audience knows. I mean, you're wearing glasses, so you probably know. When you go to the optometrist's office, they sit you down in a chair and they put some lenses over your eyes with that big thing. It's called a phoropter. And they say, okay, here, take this prescription. It's -1 and -0.75. And you go and you fill it and boom, that's it. But the problem is your visual system actually works when we are upright, standing, and moving, not sitting, not in a dark room, not with a machine over your face that limits your peripheral vision. So a big problem I see with the way that optometry is done everywhere is that it's not functional. And so when I work with optometrists, I have a team in New York that I've been working with for a few years now. We are doing things standing. We are doing things walking, moving through space. And myself specifically, I can give you my story. I had braces put on at the age of 10. I sucked my thumb. So right then and there, you know that I have a narrow palate because I sucked my thumb till I was about 6 because I was tongue-tied. So I couldn't get my tongue up to the roof of my mouth. So my jaw development was not as optimal as it could have been because the tongue is what develops your jaw. Because the small force that the tongue puts on the palate is how your jaw develops. So number one issue right there. That's my root cause issue, is where my tongue was in my mouth. Then I got braces at the age of 10 to fix my bite was a mess. That was not cute. And then got them off at age like 16 or 15. But in that time period, I had a head injury. And after my head injury, about 6 months later, I got glasses. So this is a very common story for people. And every single year, I wore glasses since the age of around 15 till literally a year or two ago. And every year, my glasses prescription went up a little bit, up a little bit, up a little bit. And then a couple years, I had like a little astigmatism. And so when it comes to looking at somebody's visual system, I have to go deep into their history to figure out what's going on. Now, with everything I've done, I've reversed my eye prescription. I still have a prescription that I wear sometimes here and there, but I don't really need anything. I actually was overcorrected for 4 years. It was around 2020, 2018, 2019, 2020, I think till about 2021. And during those 4 years, I had significant insomnia. The week that my eyeglasses changed, my insomnia, it wasn't like it went away, but the quality of my sleep changed significantly. Because when you are putting on a pair of glasses, especially if it has a -175 minus in front of it, you are minifying your world and you have to tone your system up to see that. So your inner levels of stress are increased. So for me, that showed up in insomnia. For me, everything that I do that messes with my body shows up in insomnia. So it's not surprising now looking back. But that is a little rare with the insomnia. But I do see people have hip pain, low back pain, neck tension, migraines all the time from being overcorrected. And I would say about 80% of my patients are overcorrected in their prescription, mainly because of just how it's checked. Mm-hmm. Also depends on that day. What if you had a really stressful meeting, you were on a computer, you didn't see the sunrise, you were staring at a blue lit computer the entire day, and then you go get your eyes checked, and you had a stressful morning with a meeting, your prescription is going to be higher than if you were outside all morning, you looked at the sunrise, you looked at the sunset the night before, and then you went and got your eyes checked. So, and you're in a good shoe. So it really is very specific and it can change, but it also can make massive changes to how your body holds in space, your posture, how you breathe. So the visual system, the dental occlusion system, how your teeth touch, and how your brain understands these things, also how your ears are, but that's a whole nother topic. These are very important to how we hold ourselves in space and whether or not we have pain, essentially.
And what do you think about, like myself, I've been listening to all this light stuff over the last 2 years. So I take mine off pretty much all day long, especially if I'm outside, just to get as much natural lighting, because I don't want to block it, because I've heard it can block like 40% even with these clear lenses. So I only really use them for podcasting or at work when I'm doing things on screen or whatever, and I need to focus because they're for reading. And I've noticed my eyes are getting better just by not wearing them as much. But what do you think about that? What's your
You're in
idea?
A plus prescription. So that relaxes your eyes. So I'm more interesting because I'm one eye is one thing and one eye is the other, not optimal. But for
Mm.
people in a reading prescription, that will relax the eyes, any sort of plus. So for you, there are something called CR39 lenses that do allow for UV light to permit through the lens. So, and they are actually cheaper than regular polycarbonate lenses. So it's really interesting. They don't even offer it. You have to ask for CR39. So
Hmm.
that's a really good take home point for people listening that wear glasses. Just go get CR39. If you wear contacts, you want to wear the Total Daily ones. It's a maroon packet that it comes in. It's not AccuView. All the other contact lenses block UV light. So the Total Daily ones just happen to be the ones I wore my whole life because I was allergic to a lot of the other lenses. But yeah, so for you, that's not something I would worry about at all. I would wear them. They probably actually relax your system on a computer screen.
Hmm. Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And LASIK, what do you think about that?
Oh boy, I just did a whole mini series on it. So
Oh,
I just,
cool.
yeah, and I'll send it to you if you want. LASIK is really problematic from multiple standpoints. We could talk about it from the health perspective of what it actually does to the eye and
Mm-hmm.
people and their side effects. But from my perspective, from movement and from the body, when you change the shape of the eye, so that itself is really, your eyeball is crucial because you're getting your photoreceptors, you're taking in everything from your environment and you're changing the shape of that cornea. A lot of people struggle with dry eyes. Like it's a really big problem with, it's like a post LASIK issue that
Mm.
are long term. It's not just 2 weeks after the surgery. But and halos and issues with night driving. So there's a lot of health components from a body movement perspective. Our body is asymmetrical. We are in patterns. Our eyes are meant to be ever so slightly flexible. And when we change the shape of the cornea, that flexibility goes away. So that's number
Mm.
one. So our eyes are meant to be flexible. Our cranium is meant to be flexible. Our body's meant to move in and out of different ranges of motion, different positions. When we do something like PRK, which is similar to LASIK, we lose that ability to move and sway as easily into different positions. Now, that's if the prescription is right. What if you've been overcorrected your whole life? Like if I got that prescription 5 years back, it's the wrong prescription for me. So if you're getting a prescription and you've only ever been corrected sitting in a dark room, and now you're getting that glued onto your eyeballs, you bet there's going to be problems with the rest of your system. So I see people struggle with things like hip pain or low back pain, and they don't add it up that it's related to their LASIK eye surgery because they
Mm.
feel fine with their eyes. Their eyes are fine. But 7 years after LASIK, like maybe even 4 years after, they start having this pain and then it won't go away, and then we kind of look back like, oh, well, you had LASIK eye surgery prior to this pain. So they are my harder patients for sure, people with LASIK, just because we almost always have to go to an optometrist for the most part because we have to change whatever prescriptions on their eyes. And that kind of sucks because somebody just got surgery to stop wearing glasses. And now here I am saying, hey, well, your hip pain is because of what you did to your eyes, what you decided to electively do. And now we have to tell you to wear glasses again. So that's like not a fun part of my job. But I've had people have major success with glasses to the point where they don't have to wear them long term.
Mm.
So it's very interesting. The other issue with LASIK is they don't test for everything. So I work with optometrists that are developmental optometrists or behavioral optometrists. And these optometrists test for really things like binocular vision issues, eye turns, a lot of different other issues that we could have in their eyes. Ophthalmologists and regular optometrists don't test for this. So if you're getting cleared for LASIK and you've never done like a really deep eye exam, you have no idea if you have any sort of deviation, if one eye is slightly higher. And now we're making a permanent change and you don't even know where your baseline is. So there's also a lot of issues with LASIK with people like that who have like a binocular vision dysfunction, and then they get very depressed because their whole world is flipped upside down. So that's a really
Mm.
severe post LASIK syndrome. And I think last year there was 46 suicides from LASIK eye surgery.
Oh, wow.
People don't talk about it.
Yeah,
I've had
I've
patients
never
in this
heard that once.
scenario.
That's a big deal.
There's a new documentary that just is coming out or came out. It's called Broken Eyes. I haven't had the chance to watch it yet, but it's
Mm.
about that. And
Wow.
there was actually a news reporter. I think her name was Jessica Starr. Don't quote me on that. And she killed herself. Death by suicide because of issues post LASIK. So, in my opinion, I think a lot of these people had underlying vision issues that were not looked at, and then
Mm-hmm.
they got LASIK done, and now they're having double vision. Their whole world is flipped upside down. They have to adjust to a completely new reality, and your visual system is your most important and most relied upon sense of your system. So
And you
it's really
mentioned if your
problematic.
bite is off asymmetrically too, it affects your vision. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you have had braces and they corrected you in a way, or maybe you just were like this and they couldn't fix it with braces, they corrected you in a way that was super asymmetrical, it's most likely going to bleed into your eyes because your floor of your eye sockets is the top of your palate. So it's completely related. So that's
Yeah.
something to think about. Braces in general is something to think about, and expansion for children in general is something to think about. All of these things where we're making permanent changes on people can influence them in a very positive or very negative way. It's just
Mm-hmm.
depending on the scenario and the timing. And I'm all
Yeah, and
about like least invasive
yeah,
is
I'm
most
at that
important.
point now too, and I'm thankful for that. Like because I've seen the corruption and the incentivization structure that drives everything. It's not like everyone's nefarious. It's more like incentives. But thank goodness I discovered, the opioid crisis before I had a back injury and I didn't take them or trust my
Mm,
doctor. But there's so many people that are just very trusting, and we saw that during the
yeah.
pandemic. And now it's like they're paying the price, but no one's allowed to talk about it. If someone dies, you're not allowed to ask, well, did they get a vaccine? Or there's just all this like weird inability to have deeper conversations that are more honest about everything. It happens in the communities of yoga. Like if you start criticizing static stretching, or it happens in all things. And I think one of the
Yeah.
best parts about people like yourself is that you're willing to look at it all, pick it apart, take good, show the bad if you can, and then move forward without being offended or ideologically captured. And we started off with that, but I think that's the paradigm shift that we need, is to start talking to people that don't think like us, constantly be re-upping our operating system and letting go of information and taking in new, and never be stuck on it. Like even what you're teaching me, I don't think you're the final expert. You're a
Right.
person and you're a living being. And in 10 years, we're going to look back and we're going to be auto-correcting even this
Oh,
conversation.
yeah.
So I think that's important, is to like not be clinging to what we think we know.
Yeah, I even look back at myself from 1 year ago and I'm like, oof, wow, I learned so much. But what you touched on is interesting because also with what happened with the pandemic, I think people are now more open to seeing things from a different perspective. But back then, it was like one way or the highway. I mean, I don't even share, I feel comfortable sharing, but I don't usually share like what I went through during that time. But I was living in New York. It was not a place to be if you didn't want to get the vaccine. And I'm very grateful for what I did back then. I'm very grateful for sticking up for myself and knowing what felt right and doing what felt right for me and my body and my choice. And that's how I look at everything. And I think that people, we need to be hypercritical of what's going on around us. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're not, we're going to get duped. And that's what's happened. And I think people now, because I see them, they come to me, they're very upset about things that have happened, their health. They've done, whether it's LASIK or the vaccine or whatever they have done, they feel duped by conventional medicine. And it's
Yeah.
only until that happens that people realize. And I think that it's important to get these conversations out there so that more and more people can realize what is happening before it gets to them in a negative way, and they can just
Yeah.
learn and be open. I love when I see 20-year-old patients that are like, oh, well, I kind of grew up in this world, so I know. And that's so cool
Mm-hmm.
to me.
Yeah, definitely a paradigm shift happening. And I can see the same thing happens with belief systems. If you were brought up thinking a certain religion or whatever
Yeah.
your belief systems are, when you discover that maybe it wasn't real, your identity was sort of shattered, and you come out of it, and then you sort of shame the people that are in it now. And that's the first response. And it happens with the pandemic and the COVID thing and the vaccine, is like people did get, if you want to call it, duped, but it's because they were under the influence of the most sophisticated psychological warfare we've
Right.
ever seen. So I should expect now to know that almost half, if not more, of the population on the planet got psyoped. And
Yeah.
so I would not be shaming them. I'd be more like, what can we do
Yeah.
to now adjust so that it doesn't happen again? And what can we do to maybe mitigate some of the negative effects instead of, that was one of the things that bothers me about the brilliant man, Dr. Jack, is that he just sort of thinks everyone's idiots, F them. And I'm like, no, that's like everyone. That's half the
Yeah.
planet. Let's
That
love
was
these
right.
people and figure
Yeah.
it out together because we're all connected. And that's just a different version of you anyway.
Yeah, and you just have to validate these people because essentially, like, nobody wants to be sick. No, people want to be healthy. People just don't know the answers. That is why they come for guidance. They come for support and guidance, and that's why they flock to certain Instagram pages or, because otherwise you wouldn't be in contact with them.
Yeah. And not everybody is supposed to be free thinking. I think that the nature of human consciousness seems to have a hive like component in a good way if you have good leaders and good thinkers. You don't want everybody being the CEO or the entrepreneur. Or everyone's so different. And I think if you have healthy leadership and healthy people that are leading the pack, that's a good thing. But when you get
Yeah,
sort of nefarious actors, it obviously turns into bad things. But
yeah,
I don't know. It's just maybe the nature of consciousness to some degree.
yeah. It's true. I mean, I always just want to save the world, and there's some real truth to that, and I do think that that is true. Like, not everybody can think like that, but the people that can have a lot of power to make changes with a lot of people, and that's why I share. It's not for myself. I don't have to. I do it because
Yeah.
I feel so much joy when somebody sees something that I have been talking about, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is my story too," and I'm like, "I'm really glad I validated you."
I love that. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
sharing too. I love learning, and then I almost feel selfish when I'm always learning and not sharing. So this
Yeah.
podcast is one of those ways where I can have cool conversations with people and then share it with all these people that maybe have never been exposed to your thoughts.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
what
really
about
appreciate it. This was fun. But
yeah, it is fun. I want to
so
ask you a
fun.
little bit about nervous
Yeah.
system and parasympathetic when it comes to pain. And also, I don't know if you've ever come across the idea of somatic work or John Sarno's work, the mind body
Yes.
prescription. That type of stuff, that was huge for me in the beginning
Mm.
for pain management. And when I did have a so called low back injury, I realized it was mostly nervous system uh, dis-ease. And so I had to start floating and slowing down and connecting with slower breathing. And I realized I was just on a hamster wheel of movement. So for me, and then realizing we can heal ourselves with our mind to a lot of degree. Not that it's all biomechanics and that's
Yeah.
all this, but I believe in the power of the mind for healing to a huge degree. So what's your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I 100% agree with you. I also, Joe Dispenza talks about this too. And I think that most people that are really struggling, it's here 100%. I'm pointing for people listening to pointing to my head because if you can get yourself into a good parasympathetic state and learn how to regulate your nervous system, which is way easier said than done. I don't want to, it is hard to do, especially with your family history, your trauma, things you've done in your life, where you're at. If you're an athlete, there's different components here. I don't think that people can just snap into nervous system regulation. I think it takes years to get to especially depending on where your starting point is. Some people might start at a place where they're pretty regulated, and so they do a little work and they feel great. Some people come from really difficult histories, generational trauma. You know, I'm from history of Holocaust survivors. Like, that is deep stuff. That is not something you can snap your way out of. That's going to take years of work. I work with a therapist in New York. I send a lot of patients to her. I work like for my patients that are struggling because I just think that you can't do this by yourself. Like, it has to be an integrative team effort. I work with another therapist who does more inner child work with people. And I think that this component is very powerful. I like John Sarno. I have had a lot of patients who love him, swear by him and his work. And I have his book. I haven't read it yet, but I have it. And I know it works. And I know that the power behind it is what your thoughts and how you're thinking. And that pattern, that feedback loop is really vital. I also, where I disagree with him is I also do think that some people really truly have a physiological, problem, whether their teeth
Hmm.
are unaligned or their visual system. you cannot outthink, like even if you do the proper meditation. I have people that work so hard on their nervous system, they're very holistic, and they're still having these problems. That's when I know there's more to their story. Maybe they have an issue with, they might have a slight eye turn that went completely unnoticed their entire life. And that could be the main thing. So, but I can gauge that when I see somebody in a session. If somebody seems very regulated and grounded and they still have pain, I'm like, now it's, there's probably something physiological actually going on. And then if somebody comes in and they have all of these problems and their nervous system's not regulated, I'm going to start very simply with like getting them to a more regulated point. And my most complicated patients are the ones that have a lot of generational trauma, a lot of trauma themselves, a lot of things in their history, head injuries, traumatic brain injuries, surgeries, just severe trauma is actually, those are the hardest cases. And you have to start very slowly. Sometimes I can only give them one thing. Sometimes they have a lot of diagnosis, like Ehlers-Danlos, hypermobility, fibromyalgia. They have a list of diagnoses. And to me, it's like, okay, not that list doesn't scare me. It's just all of these things, you've gone to a lot of specialists, and now all of those thoughts are in your head. Oh, I have Lyme disease, I have mold. And it's like, okay, well, your nervous system is responding to all these. Do I need to send you to a naturopath, a functional medicine doctor? Sure, we could do that too. But we also need to learn how to manage your nervous system through breath is something really big. I use vibration plates. I try to give people different sensory awareness tools to cool their system. For me personally, stopping to exercise was really huge. I was an athlete my whole life, and the last 2 years, I've barely worked out, and I miss it now, and now I can actually enjoy it. But I was working out on a regiment, on a schedule daily. I was working 4 or 5 hours a day. That's what my schedule was at one point. So when I stopped lifting like that, that was really big for my nervous system. I had to come back and adjust from that. Also, you can't always heal in the environment that you got sick in. So if you are living in a place that is very stimulating and you can't calm your nervous system in that place, you might have to move. And that's just a harsh reality. And I had to learn that. I moved a few times to different states, far. And for me, you sometimes have to do that. Sometimes you have to get away from people that you're surrounded by because they might be making you kind of sick, or, your thoughts are about, or I think it's like, what is that quote? Like something like, you are the people around you, the 5 people around you, you are their thoughts. Like your thoughts are there, something like that. But it is true. So who you surround yourself with is either going to regulate you or put you in a state of disease. So you really have to think very deeply about your life, and you have to do the work. You have to do emotional work, and people don't want to do it because it's hard, but it's really powerful. You have to sit with your emotions. People don't realize how much of what I do is hearing people, validating people, being there. I'm like a pseudo therapist. It's funny because my best friend is a therapist, and she's taught me so much about being able to be there for my own emotions and how to help regulate other people's emotions. And I send her patients, and it's powerful what she does. It's hard work though.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really good stuff. And it goes back to thinking that it's not the mind or the body. It's not something, they're all interconnected. And you just brought that forth with thinking about everything. The environment's not separate from you. And there's so many components. And then everyone does think about the nervous system or the head or the mind. And a lot of my favorite teachers, one of them was named Don Howard. And then I had Peter Levine on the other day. He's the somatic experiencing guy. But he always says it's not also, John Sarno's is all about the head. He's like, what about the body and the heart and the nervous system, and how much the body does keep the score? All of that plays into it. And a lot of it, you cannot rationalize your way forth or create new belief systems. First, you need a somatic experience of some form. It could be dance, it could be breath work, it could be some sort of transformational experience, but then you let go because we're all holding all this stuff,
I say also, you can't talk yourself out of the problem that you didn't talk yourself into. So the way I look at talk therapy, I don't love straight talk therapy. That's my bias. I think of, like, if you look at the Grand Canyon formed because the Colorado River went through it. And it went through any waterfall, any sort of rock formation with water going through it, it's going to form like this ridge or like dent. And that's how I think of what talk therapy did to me, and it does to my patients, is it kind of takes your history and dives it deeper, ingrains it into you, and then that's your story. And now you're clinging to that story. But you have to release it and let it go. And the only way you're going to do that is subconsciously. And that's what is so powerful with what I do, is I work on the body subconsciously, because if you put something in between your two teeth, your brain is just sensing that. You're not trying to massage your way out of jaw pain. You're trying to let your brain release something by feeling something differently. And that's the same thing as doing subconscious somatic work, music therapy, Reiki, things like this, where inner child work, all these different things where you're not talking about it. You can talk about it a little bit, but the more you ingrain it, the harder it's going to be to get it out. So I'm really a fan of like a more holistic, a different alternative approach, because it works.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do think too much talk therapy is just you're ruminating and recreating the same response, and it becomes you're attached to and identified with that narrative, and it's time to shatter that and create new stories that are more true and meaningful, and actually create a different response in the body if you are going to create any kind of new narrative. But yeah, we could keep going, but I'd love to just ask you, if you were going to die today and this was the last thing you could say, and you didn't have all your resources on the internet, and this was the only thing you could say, what would you want to share with the world?
Wow. I didn't expect that question. Um, That's a hard question. Do people always pause?
I think it's healthy to pause, because it is a true deep question.
It's a great question.
It really pulls you to like what matters most, if you were really wanting to share the essence of.
Yeah. I would probably be at peace. Like, I think that I think that you go when you're supposed to go. So I think that if I were to die, that would be the end of my journey, well, or the beginning of a new journey. But I think that would be what I'm supposed to do. So I think I would feel, or I would say something about feeling accomplished and feeling like I've done some of my work to share. I mean, it's hard because I feel like I have so much more to do. I don't think I'm dying anytime soon. I feel like I'm going to live a really long life.
Sure.
But I have a lot of work to still do. So I don't know if I would be able to really say that. Right this minute, I think I have a lot more to do on this planet. I think I have a lot more sharing to do, but I'm grateful for the things I have been able to share. So I hope what I have shared has helped people. But I don't think I'm ready to go just yet. I don't know if that fully answers the question.
No, that's beautiful. And I hope that you have a long life ahead of you. I like to think about death a lot in a good way. I think the Stoics did that. And I've read Ernest Becker's work. It's The Denial of Death. And it just helps you to meditate on your death in a way to appreciate life more, and to start living from a place of like, what would I do if I was going to die today? Or what would I say to the loved one, or anyone for that matter? And so it's more of just an exercise to play with, but not to be worried about or to think of as bad, in my opinion.
I really like that, and I'm gonna want the name of that book, because I really now you got me really thinking in a different realm, and now I have to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. Sheldon Solomon, I had him on my show. He studied Ernest Becker's work very well and speaks to it really well. And he's very playful and fun and light. But the book, The Denial of Death, is one of my favorite books I've ever read by Ernest Becker.
I'm gonna read that.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm totally gonna read. I always had like a fascination with death when I was young. My sister had even more of a fascination. But I do think you are supposed to go when you go. And I really do think that there's a journey that we are on this planet. Our soul needs to learn all these lessons, and then we get to experience a journey after. So I don't think I've had enough to share yet. If I were to die today, I don't think I'm done. So I think that I would feel grateful with what I have shared, but also not fully done with what I have to do. So
I love that. Well, I appreciate your time today. It was really fun chatting with you, and I'll be sure to make some notes for people to find you. Is there anywhere you want to say or link people to?
Yeah, sure. Most people can find me on Instagram, Aleena Kanner, and then I'll send you the resource, the free shoe stuff. So if you guys want that, that's also right on my website. I have a couple free resources for people that are like 50 pages long. Spent a lot of time on it because people always ask me the same questions, and I want to make sure everybody can get the answers because everybody deserves those answers.
Awesome. I love it. Keep doing what you're doing. You're really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.